Peach Pit is an anthology collection of 16 stories by 16 female authors. All of the feminist stories in here are about women being terrible, or vengeful, or deadly, or as the tagline says, unsavory. These are grounded literary stories, horror stories, science fiction stories, stories about sexism, racism, class. The variety of tales in this collection is incredible, but what they have in common is that they're all written by women, written about women, and written about women's wrongs rather than women's rights. The collection was edited together by Molly Llewellyn and Kristel Buckley. Molly and I have actually been friends via Instagram for a long time, and I have watched her slowly put this together and make it real. And now it's out, and it's amazing. Some of the writers in here are names that you're going to know, and some you might not. At least that was the case for me. Some of my favourite female authors are in here. Women like Lauren Groff, Kay Ming Chang, Alison Rumfitt, Aaliyah Whiteley, Chana Porter, and then others I didn't know at all. And I was so wonderfully surprised by what they offered. Across 230 pages, you get 16 stories by 16 amazing modern authors, each of whom is offering up her interpretation of a wonderfully terrible woman. A woman who does something bad. A woman who commits a crime or takes revenge. A woman who might be dangerous, vengeful, and glorious. Women being bad or unlikable is one of my favourite genres. There are so many great authors out there who are writing horribly unlikable women. Authors like Melissa Broder and Ottessa Moshfegh, and all the 16 writers in here. The very first story in this collection is by Deesha Phil-Yor, who wrote this collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, which I confess I haven't read yet. It's on my TBR. Her story is an amazing one to kick off the collection. It's called Fuckboy Museum, and it has a framing device where our protagonist is speaking to a female cop. The cop has some questions, and you don't learn until the end that these questions are about the disappearances of various men in the local area over the last few weeks and months. And the story, as it goes on, is also peppered with little quotes. Often these quotes are from dating apps or from text messages and DMs between men and women. And each of these little quotes, which appears in a box, is an exhibit in the Fuckboy Museum, proof that men suck. In the story, we learn about the protagonist's living situation, her backstory, her friendships, her family, and her dating life. And we always remember the fact that she is being questioned by the police in connection with an obvious crime. This story is darkly funny. The quotes that it's peppered with, which are often made up of just terrible statements or attempts at flirtation by gross, weird men, they hit home really hard. It's relatable in a bleak way, and also in a really funny way. And it's such a satisfying kind of story to kick off this collection. And then things only get better. The second story is by one of my favourite current authors, Taiwanese-American writer Kay Ming Chang, author of Bestiary. In true Kay Ming Chang fashion, hers is a blend of reality and surrealism. It tells the story of a woman who is cold called by someone who's trying to scam her, and she and this wannabe scammer end up in a very sexual lesbian relationship. But we also learn a little bit about our protagonist's relationship to her father. And as Kay Ming Chang so wonderfully manages to do, we flip between 2 or 3 different periods in her life. When she's musing on sex, when she's musing on her youth, when she's musing on her dad, and surrealism comes into play whenever it needs to. Her father is a hypochondriac, and she mentions the fact that he's always scared of shitting because when he was a kid, he went into an outhouse in the middle of the night, and there he saw a female ghost squatting over a toilet, shitting out her own intestines. It's a wonderfully Kay Ming Chang thing to do. The idea that she cannot separate folklore, surrealism, elements of horror and grossness with sex, violence, family, and other things. It is a true Kay Ming Chang story, and the editors of Peach Pit were savvy and lucky to get a story from her in this collection. It's wonderful. So as you can see, there are crime stories in here, horror stories, surreal tales, science fiction, and I'll talk about a few more of them in a sec. But some of them are just kind of tragic tales. One of them is called Sick, and it's written by Alicia Elliott, an author I have never come across before, at least to my knowledge. This story, which appears about halfway through the book, is about a middle-aged mother who pulls her own child out of school in order for the two of them to move in with her mother, an elderly woman who is emotionally abusive, who is very good at lying, but the daughter knows every time her mother lies. But guilt and responsibility and all of the kind of toxic things that our parents instill in us force her hand. And so she moves in with her mother, and her mother wants to set her up with men and tells lies about various things. She tells lies about her own health in order to get what she wants. She's awful. There's nothing supernatural here. This isn't genre fiction, it's just kind of a tragic tale. And it kind of hurts to read. Other than these being stories about unsavory women doing terrible things, it's also a wonderfully diverse collection. The contributors to Peach Pit are from the UK, the US, and Canada. There are cisgender writers in here, transgender writers, white, black, and Asian writers. There's a wonderful diversity here. I talked to Molly about this, and she said that while stories about terrible women doing terrible things is an increasingly populated genre, it's often quite a white-dominated genre. And so she and Kristel Buckley made a very conscious decision to have this be a diverse collection of stories about straight women, about gay women, about cis women, trans women, and women of various different countries, cultures, and races. And that's an absolutely wonderful thing. Take, for example, the story Buffalo by trans writer Alison Rumfitt, author of Tell Me I'm Worthless, one of my favourite books of all time. Buffalo is a straight-up horror story. It's about 10 pages long, and it's told in the second person, from the perspective of a trans woman who's really, really posh, and she's had to move from a big city to a small town to try and get away from some of the crime that is targeting her. Men following her home, people abusing her or threatening abuse. But now in this small town, someone is killing and skinning women. And the local consensus is that she's the one doing it, but she's not. So she's run out into the woods, and she is narrating this story out loud to the person who really did it. The whole story is told from the perspective of a woman shouting out into the woods, "I know you're out there. I know what you're doing. I know you're to blame. I didn't do this." And so she's constantly talking to you about herself. It's very engaging. It's about scapegoating, it's about transphobia, but it's also a disgusting, murderous tale of men targeting women and abusing them, and trans women getting the blame for it. Like everything Alison Rumfitt does, there is a thick underlying element of sadness and shame and frustration and anger. And as we all know, she's also just an incredible talent when it comes to horror and the powerful voices of her narrators, and that is very much true here in the story Buffalo. Then there's the story Composition by Aaliyah Whiteley, who's an amazing author of surreal science fiction and horror. Her story is pretty simple and really gross. It tells the story of a young girl who, early in her life, realizes she has this kind of power to manipulate all living things that are in any way involved in decomposition. Any animal, any creature, any bacteria that is attracted to death, any creature that is part of that element of the circle of life, she's able to speak to and manipulate. When the story begins, she's returning to some house that she used to live in. When she walks inside, she's excited to talk to this boy, whom we quickly realize is her brother, and his body is lying, decomposing on the sofa where she left it 6 months ago. What the hell? Why did she do that? What happened? And then we're quickly thrown back to the beginning, to the discovery of this power, to her relationship to her parents, to her brother, to the house itself. It's a really, really gross, kind of fun, weird horror story. But the book actually ends with maybe its most tragic tale, a story by Lauren Groff. Lauren Groff wrote Matrix, and she is one of the most beloved authors around today. I absolutely adore her writing. She is amazing. She is a gift to literature. Matrix is a true masterpiece of historical fiction. And at the very end of Peach Pit, we get her story Amaranth. This is the story of the titular Amaranth, a young girl who often goes by Mary. On the first page of this story, she's in the back seat of her father's car, and she watches him get out of the car, which is parked outside of an apartment building, and a man she recognizes walks out of the building, gets into a kind of altercation with her dad. Her dad slips over on the icy pavement and dies. Was he killed? It's slightly vague. I guess if you're being charitable, you might call it an incident of manslaughter, but she's the only one who saw it. And so whether or not her Uncle Otto actually did anything wrong kind of dies with her unless she says something. But she doesn't. Instead, we watch her grow up throughout this story, which is only about 20 pages long. As she goes through her teenage years and eventually enters college, we watch as her relationship with her mother is strained, and her mother's relationship to Uncle Otto develops in some kind of tragic way, depending on who's telling the story. But Amaranth is now suffering with selective mutism. She's lost a lot of weight. Doctors are worried about her. Her mother's worried about her. And I won't tell you any more. But this is a very, very hard-hitting story. And I wouldn't expect anything less from Lauren Groff. The writing in this story is marvelous. Her command over language is so beautiful, and it shines here in this story. And there are so many other stories I haven't mentioned here. I could review all 16 of them one by one, but we'll be here all day. This is an amazing collection. Stories of surrealism, stories that blend science fiction, horror, crime thriller, stories of tragedy, stories of satisfaction, stories of hope, but they're all stories by women, about women being terrible. Being so satisfyingly awful, or at least unsavory. What a wonderful collection. Peach Pit is important. It's a really, really important collection. It was edited together by two amazing people, full of love for literature, love for the feminist writings of incredible modern writers. This is a book that celebrates feminist authors and what they're doing in the world of literature today. Please check this out. Of all the books that have come out this year, this is one that I would implore anyone and everyone to read. I would buy a giant stack and just hand them out to people on the street. This is so necessary. A wonderful intersectional collection of feminist stories about badness. Oh, I loved it. Please go check this out. Grab yourself a copy, enjoy it, and subscribe for books.